Today we meet in the budget hearing. One of the highest and most significant priorities and responsibilities that we as a board hold is to account for the money that is given to us from tax holders. We recognize that these funds are taken from the pockets of people who would otherwise use them for children. But that with those funds, we fund a very important social service, and that is the education of our society. Education is one of the most fundamental things that we provide citizens of this country, and so we recognize that those funds are very significant. What did I say?
Just the shot of
just drinking that. And so today we stand accountable. And we present to the board what we plan to do with the funds that the public has given us. This is one of our most important responsibilities, is to show integrity and purpose and clarity with the budgeted funds that are given to the district. So it is with great significance and honor that we meet today in a budget hearing and present our plan with what to do with the money that we have been given. We are going to vote on the decisions that were made at a previous board meeting. The legislation has recently met. We promise the public that we will gather that information, we will process that information, and we will amend our budget appropriately. But today is not a day to ask those questions as much as it's a day to move forward with the directions that we as a board gave our business administrator the last time we met in preparation for this business hearing. So, just so the public knows, we are very well aware of changes that the legislation is making, the legislators are making, but today's budget is to move forward with direction that this board gave previously. We will move forward with we will amend our budget in the future based on information that has recently come in. But this is a large ship that turns slowly and appropriately so. So if you don't see that mentioned in our budget hearing, that's why we're moving forward with what we have, and we will adapt later. We're grateful to turn the time over to the superintendent. He's going to say a few words before the budget hearing because he is at the helm. And we'd like to hear from him. And then after he speaks, we will hear from our business administrator, who will present the details of the budget. When he's done, we will open it up for public comment. Anyone that came to speak about the budget will be able to speak, and then the board will move forward with some formal action. Superintendent, if you'd like to begin, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that preface. It is a weighty responsibility overseeing the budget, and it's a primary responsibility of the board to vote on that and set that forward. As superintendent, I feel the weight of my role in this process. For those who may not be aware, I am actually the budget officer by law, and so that is one of the things I was very aware of when I applied for this job. And that has more to do with our day-to-day operations, or as much to do with our day-to-day operations as it does with this budget. A budget is a plan, of course, for how you plan to allocate funds and to spend the money that's entrusted to us by taxpayers. And the board sets the destination that plan should serve. That plan should take us to that destination, the ends that have been created by the board. And if you haven't been listening in on board meetings, that is a constant source of conversation for the board. It's a renewing conversation to make sure that we're focused in the right direction, that we're clear in our language. And they always ask me, do you have the clarity that you need? Well, that clarity that they give me about our purpose as a district and where those elected officials ask that we as administrators take the district is the source of contemplation for me and constant conversation. Mr. Larsen and I'm not going to look back at his expression when I say this. We talk pretty much every day. And I'd say we talk at various hours of the day and night. And our conversations are not just about the numbers. Our conversations are about whether we are making decisions that are in service of the ends that have been set forth by the board. And this budget process is an opportunity for us to formalize that and to reset that course for the coming year, to reflect back on the trends that we see and to look forward to be sure that we use resources in a meaningful way. And I really appreciate that partnership that we have. That is not a separate entity. We work very closely, and I'm appreciative of John and his entire department and the hard work they do to keep us on course and to give us the information we need so that we can make decisions that will truly serve the ends the board has set out. And as I said, there are small and large budget discussions that we have nearly every day. How do we allocate this? How do we allocate that? Because the way that we allocate funds after the board sets the budget is reflective of our values. It's reflective of the level of integrity that we have in carrying out the board's ends and that destination. So every time we spend money as a district, as I said, I feel the weight of the responsibility as the budget officer, but I also feel the weight of responsibility that every expenditure or every step that we take needs to be a step toward that destination that has been set by the board. And I have a high level of confidence in the board's clarity about their ends and what they would like us to accomplish, and a high level of confidence in my relationship with John and his department and our ability to work together to accomplish those ends, and in John's technical ability and his department's technical ability to be sure that we have the information we need to move forward. So I thank you for the opportunity to be a part of that process, and I'll turn the time over to John to explain in greater detail the budget itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent.
So I was asked to begin with a recap of the 2016 bond authorization. So this is going to be a very short mini presentation as we have...
A little closer to your mouth, John. It's a little hard to hear you.
Too far? I am a little soft-spoken. Okay. Better?
That's better. Thank you.
All right. So I'll have a little mini presentation at the beginning here, just as a kind of a capstone, if you will, as we've ended the bond issuances associated with the 2016 bond authorization from the public. So this is a summary of that process. This first slide indicates what was actually the original plan that went out. We had several schools on here in various areas, totaling the bond, of course, was $245 million. And you can see the total here of the projected total was between 222 and 261, and the board at that time settled on an amount right in the middle there, because it was an estimate. We've got a lot of unknown costs with the construction. That bond, of course, was approved by the voters, 60% of the voters. These are the timelines of when we sold bonds. We sold a series in 2017 and then 18. We did two in 2019, and then we did one in 2020, the very beginning of 2020 here. And then we did refinance already one of the series of bonds that we did in 2019, and I'll show a little more information on that. The board did take action to swap out a land purchase for the furnishings and equipment in June of 18, and then also the board took action to add yet another school because we had enough savings on the bond issuances and the construction costs that we were able to get yet another school built with these monies. So here's where the projects ended up. We had Mountain Creek Middle School, South Jordan, that actually came in under budget. The rebuild of West Jordan Middle School was a little bit higher than we had estimated. Mountain Point Elementary School was under budget. Ridgeview Elementary School was a little higher than we had estimated. Mountain Ridge High School was under budget. Hidden Valley Middle School was under budget. I also want to point out, though, something that's very significant here. These two schools, Mountain Ridge High School and Hidden Valley Middle School, are both opening or did open 1 year sooner than we had planned. So not only were we under budget in total, getting another school in the process, but we opened two schools a year sooner than anticipated with that, which financially speaking is just phenomenal to me that we were able to do that. You can see Antelope Canyon. There's this projection at the moment only shows a small amount going towards that new school, and then the rest going towards the elementary sites. However, these schools, when you build a school, it's not just done one day and it's just ta-da. There's ongoing things that need to be done, much like a construction of a home, a punch list, if you will, and several punch list items are still occurring. So we won't know the final results, but we are anticipating good news on all of these, causing the money that's available to go towards Antelope Canyon to be increased. The bond issuances themselves, here's the range that occurred. This is a nice history. That is, all of these are on board docs, by the way, for your reference. 2017, what we issued, 18, 19, and 20. I did list the refinance down at the bottom of the 2020B bonds that did refinance the 2019A bonds. Because the 2019A bonds at 3.32%, we were able to refinance those for 1.55%, thus saving quite a bit of money for taxpayers into the future. If you see here, though, the par or the face value of the bonds, we issued $229,900,000 of bonds, but we ended up with $245 million even. I think this thing is slowly going down. $245 million even of the net bonds received, and that's because we received some premium on the bonds as well as cost of issuances. So the authorization of $245, that's where we were, that's where we are, and ended up. But I want to compare that to, and this is how Jordan School District did it, with the premium included. I want to compare that to how others have done bonds. The par or face amount would have been the $245 million, and then the premium received cost of issuance would have resulted in $260 million of proceeds. Thus, the way Jordan School District did it actually saved $15 million for the taxpayers moving forward. Before I move into the budget presentation, any questions from the board on this summary of the bonds issued from 2016 authorization?
Not a question, but just stating the obvious. I am so proud to be part of the Jordan School District for many, many reasons. This is one of the reasons of which I'm most proud. This was a true team effort from so many different people, and to be able to go to the community to ask for their trust and to ask for their hard-earned dollars, and to be able to deliver in a way that says we came in under budget, on time, ahead of time, and we did exactly what we asked, or what we said we were going to do. We took the high road when we when we had options, and I am just so very grateful and proud to be a part of this organization and what was accomplished with these bonds, and well done. Well done.
A lot of good news with this. At the beginning of this process, so much of this is out of my hands and out of others. How much are the bids going to come in on the buildings? How much are the bids going to come in on the sale of the bonds? And so there's a lot of estimating that goes in, but things ended up phenomenally well for, I believe, everyone involved. Okay, so with that, I'm going to switch gears and bring up the formal budget presentation. This is a balanced budget. The definition of a balanced budget is that the revenues and the monies in reserve that we have are greater available than what we are planning to spend. There is no certified tax increase proposed in this budget. There are some budget reductions that the board had talked about, and a tax rate transfer, and the bond construction projects that we'll be going over. Some of the quick things that I'll try and go over rapidly. We go over these each year, but I want to have this as a resource for others that may look at this, as well as for the board. Operational changes, state revenues, enrollment, the assessed valuations per student, and the some uncertainty items due to the situation we're in right now. First one is the bond school construction. We do have 2 schools that are going to be opening this coming year, and we do have a lease revenue bond that the board has approved and has been bid out for a new elementary school to be constructed in the Daybreak area. Black Ridge is moving to a traditional schedule, and we are expanding the ALPS program in the middle schools with this budget, and Majestic Elementary is becoming a magnet arts school with this budget. The state revenues, as introduced by President Dunford, things change constantly, and this budget was prepared based on instructions from the legislature in the 3rd special session, and those instructions are listed here, where we were asked to prepare a budget that was flat. And that's what this budget reflects. Budget changes in the future will reflect the changes that occurred this last week. Our enrollment is projected to increase a couple thousand students. That, of course, can change. This is an estimate, but you can see a constant increase in our enrollment in each area, middle, high school, and elementary. The assessed valuation per student that a school district has is a measure of its wealth and how it can compare to others in its ability to do things financially. As you can see here, the assessed valuation for Jordan School District has been increasing, which is great. The assessed valuation is on a higher growth path than our number of students, which is a good financial indicator. When we compare ourselves, though, with our neighboring districts, there are some challenges, as we are the lowest on that measurement among the county. And so that is a struggle that Jordan School District has had for years in trying to keep up with our neighbors when our ability to raise those funds is hindered. This is a comparison off of that schedule showing how much money each school district could raise if they had the exact same tax rate that Jordan School District had last year. And as you can see off on the far column here, it is a significant amount per student more that other districts are able to receive. As a result of that, the legislature has put in some measurements to do some equity funding, and that's been added here to indicate that there is some additional monies coming in to districts that have that challenge, but we're still, even with that, we're still quite a ways behind. And I know I'm going through those rapidly, but I think we've been over this before, Board, but if you have a question, stop me. This is a chart showing the assessed valuation per student, that same measurement across the entire state. Jordan School District is by no means the worst in the state. We are probably a third from the bottom, 2/3 from the top. We're definitely below average, but not near the bottom. The assessed valuation per student, because of its relationship to tax rates, usually the districts that have the highest assessed valuation up here at the top are going to be they would have the lowest tax rates in the state, and those that are down here at the bottom would usually have the highest tax rates in the state. It's an inverse relationship. And so here I'm going to flip them with the tax rates, and you can see Park Cities here at the bottom and South San Pete's at the top. That holds true. Jordan, however, is below the district average on both, which is, for us to have accomplished what we've done with that type of a challenge, I think is phenomenal. There is a challenge coming up in this current year that just want to draw some quick attention to, which we've already somewhat addressed earlier. But there is some thought that there's a potential for some enrollment changes based on the COVID-19 situation we find ourselves in. There's also the unemployment rate at a 70-year high. Now, both Utah and the national unemployment rate has fallen. We've got the latest Utah unemployment rate there at 8.5%, but coming off of a 70-year high is certainly significant, which will raise some challenges this next year as we see that play out and see how rapidly things return. The cost of sanitation and personal protective equipment is another concern for the budget going forward. A quick financial overview. I'll do a district-wide overview as well as each fund. I know some of these funds are quite small, but the board has discussed some of these funds, and so I didn't want to skip over them. First, a district-wide representation. We have our split between revenues and between state revenues and local revenues is pretty even. And our federal revenues is pretty small, really, at just over 5%. District-wide, all of our monies combined, you can see that our revenues and expenditures have been growing over the past few years. We do show a decline of both for next year. That is due to carryover balances as well as grants, deferred revenues, things that are occurring in the current year that are budgeted to be spent there that will roll over to the next year. So these will be softened and brought down. To start with the general fund, as a reminder, the general fund takes care of the day-to-day operations of the district. The board did give some instruction to make some changes to the normal operations of changing the school allocations, district allocations, and a hiring freeze. The board also gave some instruction on shifting the property tax revenue from the capital projects fund to total $5.6 million. Now, something that did change last week was the legislature did change the law, and now the board does have an option available to it to do an inter-fund transfer out of the capital fund to the general fund if it so chose. This budget reflects the original conversation we had about the tax rate shift, but there are certainly advantages to just doing the fund transfer if the board would like to discuss that. And I'll touch on that a little later as well. The general fund balances that we have at the end of next year, according to the budget, are reflected here. These are our fund balances, and as you can see, there are several different categories of where the monies are kept. We do try to keep what many people call the rainy day fund at its legal maximum of 5%. We have educator grants, health insurance, and then some accruals here for benefits for employees as they come due. This next chart just shows a 3-year history of that with a little more detail and showing what last year's actual was compared to what this year's final amended budget would result in, and then the same numbers on the end. Of significance, though, here is this bottom line. Without the contingencies and carryovers, this is what the fund balance would be. So there are contingencies and carryovers put into the budget, and we've presented both in the budget book and here what they would be if those were not included, as well as on this next slide. This slide is only the general fund, showing the expenditures, revenues, and fund balances. As you can see, there's that same increase for expenditures and revenues, but there's a small purple line. I hope it's visible here, but there's that small purple line is the muted or just softened amount when we take out the contingencies and carryovers. As a result, the fund balance flattens out a little more and doesn't have this larger decline. And that's just a matter of what happens in providing a budget when you're trying to look at what they're authorized to spend for those, and then assuming that there will be some carryovers or contingencies brought over that are not spent. This slide, again, is here every year, but this is just for your reference as to what is included in each of the categories that I'm going to show next. We're required to have several categories by the federal government. These are their definitions and where we place them. The State Board of Education instructs us on certain items and will from time to time say, well, we want you to code this here instead. And so there are constant refinements and changes that are happening, but in the major categories are from the federal government. And this is the breakdown of how that spending occurs in the general fund. It's just over 67% is budgeted in instruction, with the remainder being in some sort of a support service to that instruction. For example, custodial services. Many years ago, there wouldn't necessarily have been a school custodian, and instead others would have filled that role. But as a support for those that do teach, we now hire custodians, as an example. There's a lot of money. I don't really want to go point by point on here because we've done this each year, but there's a lot in here that still supports the instruction. Counselors, as an example, are not included in instruction, but are a significant part of the students' education and their plan for their future. I hope I'm not, if I'm going too fast, please, board, stop me. This graph shows the expenditure, what we call by object. So this is what it's spent on. And as you can see, 62% is spent on salary and wages, and 23, almost 24% is spent on benefits. So a substantial amount of the budget is spent on personnel. And then the next highest is going to be supplies and then utilities. On to the debt service fund. This is our mortgage payments on the bonded debt, which we discussed a little earlier, but this is going to just show the finances of the monies in and monies out for it. We have the revenues and expenditures, trying to match those up, but still maintaining a sufficient fund balance in case something doesn't come in quite as anticipated, because we are legally obligated to pay those bonds. This graph shows the balances over time and where they'll be headed for our debt service or our outstanding debt. When the bond election occurred, we were quite low in our debt level, and we've brought that up. We issued $245 million of bonds that we talked about earlier, but we're let's see, at the end of next year, I wrote this down, we would have $205 million outstanding. So it will be coming down rapidly, and we'll show this graph in the future so you can see it as it matures. The long-term debt per student, this graph is very interesting just to give you a feel of where the district is as far as debt in comparison to others in the state. This is an area where we do actually have data for the charter school average, so they are included on here as well, and we have a district average. There is voter-approved debt, which is the general obligation debt, and then there's other debt, such as the lease revenue bonds. So with the authorization of the lease revenue bonds, our piece that's orange will grow a little bit, but at the same time, we're paying off our former lease revenue bonds and paying off our general obligation bonds. The capital projects funds accounts for the restricted monies that go in for the construction of buildings, equipment purchases, bus purchases, and this fund is always fun to look at the graph on it because of the nature of one-time money coming in and being spent rapidly to construct a building, and then when it's built, it just drops rapidly. And with the construction of all these schools, that's what's happened. It's come down quite rapidly. As a reminder, the board did ask that there would be a tax shift out of this fund totaling the $5.6 million, and then that same reminder about there is an option now that wasn't available a couple weeks ago to just do an interfund transfer for it. This is a quick summary of the bond authorization, which we've already done earlier, so I'll skip that. And then here is the schools that were being built, 7 schools, which is one more than was voted on. Bonus. The Nutrition Services Fund, this is a restricted fund just to account for the school lunch and breakfast programs. Property taxes aren't involved in this fund at all. And of great significance is that it has been 11 years since lunch prices were increased in this district. I know that's not been my case at home. Here's the graph for nutrition services. Of note here is the decline in revenue this year. With the school dismissal came quite a bit of loss of revenue for school lunch services. There has been efforts made to buoy up that level from the state, and we have been promised federal funds as well to aid in that effort, but currently we are showing a decline in revenue for this, and thus utilizing a significant amount of their fund balance. The self-insurance fund is where we take care of our health insurance, workers' compensation, disability, and life insurance. Also of significance, it has been, 5 years now since we've had a premium increase in our health insurance plan, which, again, I don't know where else that's happened. That's pretty significant. This fund has a very healthy fund balance, hence no premium increase. But the projected cost for the fund is going up, and the revenues are fairly flat. We do have a fund here called the Pass-Through Taxes Fund. This is a fund that was created by the Utah State Auditor several years ago, and then the State Board of Education asked us to move the contributions that the school district is required to make for charter schools to this fund as well. Because this just receives money and sends it on, the fund balance for this is always zero, and the revenues and expenditures always equal each other. This fund, though, is a very large guesstimate because it is what we're told it is. So this is not something we have a lot of say in, except for when tax increment projects are approved on the front end. But once they're approved, it's off and going on their own. This is the charter school contributions that the district has been asked to make each year, again leveling off for the past couple of years. The non-K-12 fund was discontinued at the end of last year, if you recall that. It contained the preschool or adult education costs of the district. That fund was collapsed into the general fund. But here it is, just so you kind of get some history and can put that into trend analysis with the general fund. We do have the Jordan Education Fund, whose purpose is to reach out to the community on behalf of Jordan School District. Their fund is quite different in that their fund is not necessarily there to, it's based on donations. And so there's a budget based on what could occur. As an example, and I know there's some foundation people in the audience today, so I'll give a really nice example. If someone were to come in and say, well, I will give you $10 million, but you must spend it immediately, we would be breaking the law because we would be spending beyond the budget. So the budget is intentionally high on this so that we can take care of any donations that come in. The Student Activities Fund is where student fees, donations, fundraisers, extracurricular activities go into. A lot of things are happening in this fund. This fund was altered a bit a few years ago as a result of a change in definition by the state. Therefore, the 16-17 numbers jump up into 17-18 quite a bit. But if you see that, if you ignore the far left year, the 16-17 year, the others are more comparable. Similar, though, to the Foundation Fund, this one, if schools were to utilize those funds at an increased rate, we would be breaking the law if we spent too much. So this is actually a intentionally high budget because the schools are authorized to spend their funds that they have collected for those donations and activities and fees. The tax rates that are shown here are going to be, they reflect the certified tax rate plus new growth for the district. We do have that transfer in again that I've mentioned before with the interfund transfer. So I might take just a minute here and describe that if the board is open to that change. Last week through HB 5003, the legislature approved the opportunity for the board to just do a one-time transfer out of Capital Projects Fund to your operating fund, the general fund. It would do the same thing as the tax rate transfer. The tax rate transfer will be a guesstimate based on a tax rate. So I know we will not hit the mark exactly at $5.6 million. Mr. Anderson and I have done our best to estimate that at the direction of the board. But if we do the tax rate transfer, it will be showing up as taxes and will not show as a transfer. And so it won't show up anywhere on any of the financials or in conversations into the future unless someone remembers it and brings it up. The other reason you may want to consider this is tonight is the night for to accept the certified tax rate or to go to a truth and taxation hearing. But once that's done, that's done. But a budgeted transfer from one fund to another, you could change later. So say a couple months from now, if the board decided, well, instead of $5.6 million, we wished we had done $5 million, or we wished we had done $6 million. You could make that change later because the transfer is just a budget item at this point in time. And then up to a year from now, you could change your minds on that and have some flexibility if you did change it to a transfer. What the board did a couple weeks ago with this, I think, was brilliant. It was a good move. It's just things changed. And we now have a new tool to accomplish the same thing, which does have some benefits and open up some options for the board in the future that weren't there 2 weeks ago. I hope that makes sense. What I've prepared here is as directed by the board, but I want you to know of the option you have there openly. So here is the tax rates as instructed by the board a couple weeks ago, and with the certified tax rates, the last of which we got yesterday. So the basic program, which is set by the legislature, would be falling a little bit. The voted leeway would fall a little bit. The board local levy would be increasing as a result of that rate transfer from the Capital Projects Fund of 0.000206. Therefore, the Capital Projects Fund is decreasing based on the certified tax rate process where it comes down, but it's also decreasing by the 0.000206 to move to the board levy. Overall, the certified tax rate is falling by a 0.00109. And if the board chose to do the transfer, we would just reverse that 0.00206 and place them back. This is a graph of a $100,000 home value and how that's changed over the years. Now, home values have increased over the years as well. I thought it is interesting, though, that the board went through a truth and taxation hearing last year, and if you see where it ended up, it doesn't seem out of place. It's not a big blip in the radar. There is no truth and taxation hearing scheduled this year. This would be your last opportunity to state such that you want to use it. It would be tonight. But assuming that is not the intent, based on our prior conversations, what I would be looking for from the board tonight is 3 motions. The first would be to adopt the 1920 final amended budget, and the second is to adopt next year's budget and set the property taxes as follows: the basic rate at the certified rate, the voted and board levies at the certified rate, and then you need to decide if you want to do that transfer or if you want to do the tax rate transfer of the 0.00206, the debt service levy at the 866, and the capital local levy, the reverse, the certified tax rate less the 0.00206 or the fund transfer, for a total certified rate of 006567. And then I would ask a third motion, if you would, please authorize us to make amendments to the budget, to the revenue items, and the how this filters through the numbers in the budget book as a result of these new numbers that we've been given for the certified tax rate.
Thank you, Mr. Larsen. We appreciate your presentation. Board members, let me start with you. Questions you have, comments you'd like to make? Tracy?
I'll start with a big thank you to Mr. Larsen and those that work with him. This is a tough year, and we've had to, being able to put together a budget through all this uncertainty has not been easy. But so appreciate all your time and efforts that have gone into this, and everyone in the district for being fiscally conservative. We have a conservative district, and everybody is conscious of money that we spend, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Tracy. Marilyn, question, comment? Mr. Young, Chairman?
Yeah, I just want to point something out. And this is actually a bit of a look back to the 2018-19 year, but if you go to page 56 and 57 of the budget book that I think is online and is available to the public, there's some interesting comparisons between us and other districts, and I think it's quite insightful to see the graphs that Mr. Larsen showed our ability to raise funds with our property tax dollars is below the average in the state. our property tax rate, which, again, remember he said is usually inverse, is below the average rate. We don't have the ability to raise the kinds of funds that other districts do. But if you look at that last page in the budget book in those comparisons, and you look at the percentage of instruction dollars to our overall costs, so that means what dollars are going directly to our teachers and to our classrooms, to the instruction of our class. For every dollar that we spend in this district, 66.75 cents goes to instruction. That's the third highest ratio. It's above the state average, and it's actually well above the state average. And so with the limited dollars that we do have, those dollars are going to our teachers, going to our instruction in the classrooms. And I think that is something that we can all be grateful for. And I know this board has set that as a priority, and I'm just very grateful to see those kinds of investments happening. Again, when you look at it as on a per dollar, it's just a couple cents compared to other districts. But you add those couple cents to a $400 million budget, and it adds up really quickly. And so we are investing in the right things, in the right people, and just very, very grateful for that investment.
Thank you, Mr. Young. All right, now if the board has asked and answered or made any comments, I'm going to turn to the public. If any of you came to speak regarding the public hearing, now is your opportunity. I don't have a list in front of me. Jerry, did anyone sign up? Is anyone here intending to speak about the budget? Mr. Larsen, did any comments come in online regarding the budget?
No.
Okay. Then,
I did have one clarifying question.
Please, Mr. Young.
So, John, ultimately, who has budgetary authority over the Jordan Education Foundation? Is that us as a board? Is that this board that has budgetary authority over that foundation, or is it their board that has budgetary authority?
Yes. It's a combined effort because it is a separately legal entity with its own tax ID and everything. However, because they are so intertwined with our entity, the Jordan School District, we're required by accounting rules to be to display their budget, to have it as part of our department, as a department really of the district. So it is both. It's if their board wanted to take some general donations and spend it one direction, they can. We would just have to display those activities in our CAFR and in our budget and reflect those.
But what are we say? What authority do we have when we say yes? I mean, when we accept this budget, what are we basically saying to that foundation as our board? Go spend the money how you see fit, or what are? Is it? Are they in essence just like every other budget officer that has a budget assigned to them within the district, or is it different than that?
I would say it's a little different than that because another department wouldn't have its own board that it goes to spend its budget. It is unique. It is absolutely unique. I think, and I'll look to the attorney to tell me if I'm wrong here, but I believe it would be the board's role to approve or acknowledge through the approval of that budget the role that they have and their ability to say, okay, a donation just came in on behalf of Rosamond Elementary, and you are authorized to spend that foundation on behalf of that donor, we're reflecting as part of the overall budget just as a requirement of the financial rules that it be included. If our board were to step in and say, well, we don't think you should be spending that donation or these donations in that manner, I would probably want someone smarter than me in the room to help navigate who has which role on that.
So in essence, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is you said we budget higher so that what would be the harm in budgeting what was actual and then seeing as how we amend the budget 3 or 4 times throughout the year, waiting for a point at which they have a better feeling as to whether those things are coming in or not.
Yeah, it's just a trend at the moment. It could be done more often. It's just going to be, in my example, as if someone came in and said, hey, here's $5 million, go spend it on this right now, I'd have a problem because that would be illegal on me because now they're overspending their budget and yet they've got a donor money in hand ready to provide or to give. So that's why we try to set that high so that as they receive donations, they're able to then go forward with the desire of the donor. Otherwise, we would be kind of holding them back and saying, well, yeah, it doesn't matter if you got the donation. You're not authorized to spend it yet.
Just in my 5.5 years, this relationship that we have with the foundation is one of the most interesting relationships that I've experienced. So thank you for that clarification.
2 entities as one.
What's that?
2 entities as one.
Yeah.
All right, if there are no more further questions, Mr. Young, I'm going to kind of leave it to you to make these proposals, make these motions. I know there's a specific to the wording, and I know we're going to need to make a decision on the transfer versus the rate.
Okay.
So if you will just make the motions, we'll let your counterparts on the Finance Committee make the seconds, and then we'll vote.
Okay. I would like to move that we adopt the 2019-2020 final amended budget.
I have a motion by Mr. Young. I need a second.
I'll second.
I have a second by Ms. Richards. Any questions or comment? Any public comment? Those in favor of the motion and approving the final amended budget for 2019-2020, when I call your name, please say yes. We'll still vote in roll call forms because we have someone at home. So, Mr. Young?
Yes.
Tracy?
Yes.
Marilyn?
Yes.
Janice?
Yes.
Jen? Yes. Darrell?
Yes.
Bryce Dunford is a yes, so let the record show that motion passes at a vote of 7-0. Mr. Young?
So I'm going to make this motion exactly as it's read. If anybody after that motion's been read would like to discuss the specifics of the capital fund transfer, we can do that, and then we can take a substitute motion. Okay? I'd like to make a motion that we adopt the 2020-2021 proposed budget and set the property tax rates as follows. The basic school levy at the certified tax rate. The voted board levies a combined rate reflecting the certified tax rate plus 0.000206 from the capital local levy. Debt service levy 0.000866. Capital local levy, the certified tax rate less 0.000206 to the voted board levies, for a total certified tax rate of 0.006567.
Thank you, Mr. Young. That's the motion. I need a second.
I'll second that.
I have a second by Ms. Atwood. So if the board would like to do the transfer, we're going to need an amended motion. The motion on the table is to move forward with the tax rate change. So comments or questions from the board?
Yeah, I'm interested in amending the motion to just transfer the money directly from the capital fund to the general fund. I would like to hear the board's feedback on that. For me, personally, I think it's more transparent to be able to see, exactly what we've done. And then the bigger reason for me is more flexibility, especially with a lot of uncertainty right now. We have more flexibility to either transfer more or less later on, whereas the tax rate locks us in, and then we have to remember a year from now to change it back or not change it back.
So why don't you make an alternate motion? We'll take a second on the alternate, and then we can debate whether or not we move forward with the transfer.
Okay. So is it an amended?
Just say, I'd like to amend the motion that we move forward with an interfund transfer.
I move to amend the motion to transfer $5.6 million from the capital fund to the general fund and not make the property tax rate adjustment.
Second.
Okay, so I have a motion by Ms. Miller, a second by Ms. Richards. Now, any questions, comment, or observations about the amended motion?
Yeah, I have some. We adjusted the rate with some very clear constraints on how we were going to spend capital dollars next year. And I worry that by turning the revenue back on into the capital fund, that we'll forget that's how we're actually paying for this general fund, is by reducing our expenditures in the capital fund. And so I'm more in favor of leaving the rates as we're proposing to change them. My understanding of the law is that in 3 months' time and 6 months' time, when we have a better feeling as to whether this rate change actually did what we were looking for it to do, we can still, or didn't do, we can still move funds into the general fund from our capital reserve, which we have. I think it would be appropriate for the Finance Committee to take another good look at our capital fund balance and determine if there's even more that we'd like to move over. But I think because of the reduction in the expenditures, I'd still like to keep the rate flipped, because we also are committed to changing it back next year. And so, and I like the idea that we have to trigger that again, and we won't forget. And so I'm more comfortable with leaving it as is, allowing a rate change and making the adjustment when we can. This is our only chance to change the rate. We have chances, we have more opportunities to move funds out of the capital budget and into this. And so that would be my perspective on it.
Thank you, Matt. John, you had a clarification.
It's something I should have mentioned earlier, and I apologize. There is one requirement if we do the transfer, and that is the board needs to indicate the purpose for the use of those funds. So
if you get a yes vote on the amendment, we're going to have to declare a purpose, make a motion and declare a purpose?
Yeah, and it's very vague as to what that purpose is, but it's just the board would need to indicate a purpose.
Okay, but we won't need to do that if there's a no vote on the amended motion.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Other comments or questions? Does everyone understand the issue, the pros and the cons? Now's your chance to ask a question. Tracy?
Go back to what you said at the beginning, that I don't remember how you worded it.
About the expenditures?
Yeah, like why would it be better to do the property tax adjustment than?
It's just a mentality for me that if we change the revenue, our revenues will be higher in what comes into the capital budget, and there may be a temptation to say, well, we actually have this much coming in, so we could actually do more summer projects, or we could actually do more projects, when in reality what we committed to when we said we're going to make this transfer was we're going to spend less. And so I want to avoid that temptation. And it isn't optics and it's a semantics thing, but that's just kind of, I think, is that?
Why would, because you're right, the reason that we decided to do it was to spend less in summer projects. So why wouldn't just transferring the money out of capital also be spending less in summer projects if that's the purpose we identified for it?
Because we actually show the revenue coming in for the year. And so our revenue is higher, and so there's just a temptation to say, well, it's coming in, let's spend it. Again, it's slicing a hair.
I was thinking, and I see the other thing.
Right, we
Slicing
do.
a hair.
Yeah.
I totally get it.
Exactly.
And I don't think Matt would be upset if we approve the transfer. I don't think anyone would be. I just think the question is, which mentality do you want to have? I like the thinking.
I just think there's
Just later on.
We can't change the tax rate later on. We can change a transfer amount later on.
And can we change the transfer amount both directions so we could decide we want even more over to general, or we could decide we want less? Does it go both ways?
My understanding, Mr. Larsen, is we can always move funds out of the general fund to capital.
Yeah, you can do a transfer from general fund into capital, but we haven't. But that doesn't preclude the opportunity to do that.
Okay. So the flexibility, I mean, with the tax rate, we can move more. If we stick with the tax rate for the original motion, we can move more from capital into general.
By doing a transfer later.
But can we move some from general into capital later?
Yeah. Yes. We haven't traditionally, but we can.
And Mr. Young, you had talked about that we were going to adjust it next year.
Uh-huh.
Does either scenario change the way that we would do that next year?
I don't think so. No, I don't see. I mean, the one scenario we just would never have to change it.
Yeah.
And the other, we just.
Okay.
Yeah.
No more questions? Okay, so we're going to vote on Tracy's amended motion. A yes means we're going to do the transfer. A no means we go back to the original motion and we go with a rate change. So how do you vote on Tracy's motion, whether or not to do a transfer? So when I call your names, please answer. Jen, can we start with you? No. You're a no? No. Janice?
No.
Marilyn?
No.
Tracy?
Yes.
Daryl?
No.
Matt?
No.
I think I go with a no as well. So that's at a vote of 1 to 6. We will not approve the amended motion, which brings us back to the original motion as stated by Mr. Young. Same order. How do you vote on the original motion? Jen, yes means I approve the motion as it stated, and we do a rate change. A no means the motion doesn't go forward. We'd have to make some change to go forward. Jen, how do you vote on the original motion?
Yes.
Janice?
Yes.
Marilyn?
Yes.
Tracy?
Yes.
Daryl?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Bryce Dunford is also a yes, so let the record show it a vote of 7 to 0. We move forward with that motion with all of the proposed budgets and the tax rate change. The last motion is just to give Mr. Larsen some authority in the future. Is that correct? So, Mr. Young, you want to make one more motion?
I'd like to make a motion that we authorize any budget adjustments necessary, that we authorize Mr. Larsen and the budget team to make any budget adjustments necessary to reflect funds received from the certified tax rate.
Thank you.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Young. I have a second. Was that you, or Marilyn? Ms. Richards? Any questions on that motion? This is pretty standard. Any comments? All right. Those in favor of the motion, please say yes. Jen?
Yes.
Janice?
Yes.
Marilyn?
Yes.
Tracy?
Yes.
Daryl?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Bryce Dunford is also a yes. That means that motion passes at a vote of 7-0. Which now brings us to the end of the budget hearing. Mr. Larsen, do you want to make any questions? Do you have everything that you need?
I have everything I need, but if it's okay, I'd still like to embarrass a couple people that
Please.
helped me.
We'd love to hear them. They're here. They're here, aren't they?
Derek Anderson.
Please stand, Derek.
Just incredible in this process to just take all of this minutia and tons of data and sift through it and help me. And even just recently, would you please read every single bill that just went through the 5th session? Because this just he does a tremendous amount for me in this process that really frees me up to do more, and I appreciate that. And he does a great job at it with a great attitude.
Now, normally we would have you walk down and shake our hands and give you a pin, but we can't do that under the current circumstances, so we're just going to applaud everything that you do. And you probably enjoy doing it. You had one more?
Well, as always, Jerry. Jerry helps me an awful lot. So her attitude and help with everything contributes to all of this. And throughout the whole district, a budget just doesn't happen. And a person or two people, 3 doesn't do this. It's hundreds and thousands of people. So it's I'm very appreciative of everyone in the district that's mindful of the finances and budgets and is reading their reports and saying, "Oh, well, I got to plan differently now," and just having those conversations within their departments and schools.
To Jerry Clayton and everyone involved in the budget, we thank you.